Now that you have designed disaster recovery using recovery time objective, recovery point objective, and disciplined disaster recovery testing, you are ready to strengthen the capability that makes both security and recovery credible. Logging. Disaster recovery fails without trustworthy data, and security operations fails without evidence. Logging is not a technical afterthought. Logging is how you prove what happened, detect what is happening, and improve what should happen next. When you design logging strategically, you turn uncertainty into facts and create organizational confidence during incidents, audits, and executive reviews. With that transition in place, you need to position logging in a way leaders understand immediately. Logging is a leadership capability because it determines whether your organization can investigate incidents, meet compliance obligations, and demonstrate control effectiveness. If leaders ask, "Are we secure?" Logging is part of the honest answer because without evidence you cannot validate controls. If leaders ask, "Can we recover?" Logging again matters because you need audit trails, change history, and event timelines to make safe recovery decisions. When you frame logging as organizational evidence, it becomes a funded priority rather than a neglected cost line. With logging treated as capability, you now define the 3 questions that every logging strategy must answer clearly. First, what will you log, meaning which events and signals matter? Second, where will you store logs, meaning which storage tiers support investigation, operations, and long-term retention? Third, how long will you keep logs, meaning what retention is required for security, legal, audit, and business reasons? When you answer these 3 questions consistently, you stop having inconsistent logging across teams and you start having a defensible and scalable logging program. With the strategy question set, you now approach what to log through categories so you do not get lost in service by service debates. You log identity activity because identity is the control plane for access. You log administrative and control plane activity because it shows who changed what in Azure. You log workload activity because you need to detect and investigate what happens inside applications and systems. You log network and security signals because traffic paths often explain both attacks and outages. You log data access and key usage because data is often the real target. When you think in categories, your logging strategy becomes complete rather than patchy. With categories introduced, you start with identity because identity log are foundational evidence for security investigations. You want visibility into sign-ins, conditional access outcomes, changes to roles and privileges, and authentication anomalies. Leaders care because identity compromises are among the fastest ways to create high-impact incidents. Architects care because identity logging supports zero trust verification and provides traceability during audits. If your identity logs are incomplete or retained for too short a period, you may not be able to reconstruct an incident timeline or prove policy enforcement. With identity covered, you now address control plane logging because this is where you capture governance reality. Control plane logs show creation, modification, and deletion of Azure resources, policy changes, role assignments, networking changes, and security configuration changes. This is the log layer that allows you to answer the question, what changed right before the outage or incident? Leaders care because change history is critical for accountability. Architects care because control plane logs validate whether landing zone guardrails are actually being followed over time. With control plane visibility established, you now add workload and application logging because enterprise services live and die by user experience. Workload logs capture application events, service errors, performance signals, and operational health indicators. They help you distinguish between platform issues and application issues, and they help you see how failures propagate through dependencies. Leaders care because these logs connect technology incidents to business impact. Architects care because application logging supports reliability engineering, faster troubleshooting, and continuous improvement of architecture patterns. With workload logging in place, you now cover network and security logging because many incidents are explained by traffic flow. Network logs help you understand what communicated with what, whether traffic followed, expected routes, and where blockages or suspicious connections occurred. Security logs reveal alerts, detections, and policy enforcement outcomes that indicate threat activity. Leaders care because network evidence supports containment decisions and regulatory reporting. Architects care because network logging validates segmentation and routing design, especially in hub and spoke environments where misrouted traffic can cause both risk and outages. With network visibility addressed, you now focus on data and key usage logging because data is often the true target of attackers. You want visibility into access to sensitive data stores, unusual download patterns, encryption key usage, and administrative access to secrets. Leaders care because data exposure can become legal and reputational crisis. Architects care because data and key logging supports compliance, supports forensic investigations, and reinforces the principle that encryption and key management are not only design topics but operational evidence topics. With what to log covered, you now answer where to store by separating purposes rather than selecting a single destination for everything. You need a store optimized for near real-time investigation and query, a store optimized for operational monitoring and alerting, and a store optimized for low-cost long-term retention. The leadership value is cost and control. The architectural value is clarity. Different log types and different business needs require different storage strategies, and your design should reflect that intentionally rather than accidentally. With storage purposes clear, you now address organizational design because logging programs fail when ownership is unclear. Centralization provides consistency and enterprise-wide visibility, which security operations and audit teams require. Local ownership ensures application teams remain accountable for their service logs and do not outsource responsibility. The healthiest model is often federated, central standards and central collection pipelines, with clear responsibilities for teams to produce high-quality logs and respond to alerts. Leaders care because this reduces blame and gaps. Architects care because it scales across many teams without forcing a single team to own everything. With ownership clarified, you now tackle retention because retention is where logging becomes expensive if you do not design it. Retention must align to security investigation needs, legal and regulatory requirements, audit expectations, and business risk tolerance. If retention is too short, you lose evidence. If retention is too long in high-cost storage, you waste budget. Your strategy should define retention tiers, where high-value investigative logs are retained in queryable stores for a reasonable period, and older logs are archived to lower-cost storage while still remaining accessible for compliance and forensic needs. With retention aligned, you now highlight the hidden risk that leaders often overlook until it is too late. Logging gaps. A logging gap can occur when a critical resource is deployed without diagnostics enabled, when logs are stored but not centralized, when retention is misconfigured, or when time synchronization makes event timelines unreliable. During an incident, a logging gap is not a minor inconvenience. It can prevent you from proving scope, identifying the entry point, or meeting reporting obligations. Architects prevent this by defining minimum logging requirements in the landing zone guardrails and validating compliance continuously. With gaps understood, you now define governance because logging must be enforced, not requested politely. Governance includes minimum logging standards, approved storage destinations, defined retention policies, and a controlled exception process with risk acceptance and review dates. Leaders care because governance provides assurance and adaptability. Architects care because governance reduces drift and prevents each project from creating its own logging interpretation. When you govern logging, you build a platform that stays observable even as teams change and adoption grows. With governance in place, you now connect logging back to disaster recovery, because recovery without evidence can create new risk. During disaster recovery events, logs help you determine what failed, when it failed, what changed before the failure, and whether a cyber event may have contributed. Logs also provide evidence to validate that recovery steps were executed correctly and that systems are stable after restoration. Leaders care because safe recovery protects continuity and reputation. Architects care because logs reduce guesswork and prevent repeating the same failure in the recovered environment. With the disaster recovery link clear, you now ground the strategy in a realistic scenario. Imagine your customer portal goes down and the security team suspects malicious activity because authentication patterns look unusual. Without centralized logging, each team checks separate systems, timelines conflict, and leadership receives contradictory updates. With a strong logging strategy, you have one source of truth. Identity events show sign-in anomalies. Control plane events show a configuration change. Network logs show unusual outbound connections. And application logs show error patterns. You can triage faster, contain risk faster, and communicate with leadership using facts rather than speculation. This is the business value of logging done properly. Let's now discuss the key takeaways from what you learned so far, so you can design an Azure logging strategy that leaders trust and architects can defend. Logging is an organizational evidence capability that supports security, compliance, operational reliability, and disaster recovery decisions. Your logging strategy must always answer what you log, where you store it, and how long you retain it. And it works best when you think in categories rather than service lists. Identity logs, control plane logs, workload logs, network and security logs, and data and key usage logs together create a complete evidence chain. Storage should be designed by purpose, separating near real-time investigation and monitoring needs from low-cost long-term retention. Retention must align to security investigation timelines, legal and audit requirements, and cost reality through tiered approaches. Logging gaps are high risk because they can make incidents uninvestigable. So governance, minimum standards, and controlled exceptions are essential. Finally, strong logging improves disaster recovery by providing the evidence needed to restore safely and prevent repeated failure. If you want your Azure environment to be observable, auditable, and defensible during incidents, subscribe so you can continue through the rest of this playlist and build the full enterprise architecture step by step. Like this video so more leaders and architects learn how to design logging as a capability. Comment with your biggest logging challenge such as retention decisions, ownership model, or closing logging gaps. And share this with your team so you can align on one consistent logging strategy across your organization.